Let's bring in ABC News investigative reporter Olivia Rubin and civil trial attorney Tre Lovell for more. Tre, this is also critical because we know there was a dog in the house that night. The homeowners had a dog. They've since rehomed the dog. So what do you make of these motions?
No, they're good motions because this type of testimony is really going to the heart of the defense's case. They put on their expert, and if the prosecution is not allowed to put on a rebuttal expert, that side of the case is going to go unanswered. And so they think the judge is probably going to allow it. They want to have a voir dire hearing with the expert to figure out what they're going to say, do qualifications, things like that. But in a situation like this, I would be surprised if they don't allow that expert to testify.
Tre, what are you watching for now?
It's interesting. So, we're going to get more into the experts in terms of this accident reconstruction, and then the dog bite situation, and then I'm curious to see who's going to come after that. There's one aspect of the prosecution that is not really addressed yet, are those party admissions that Karen Reed made. And although we're heavily into the science now, I'm curious if the defense is going to bring anybody that is somehow going to explain how those admissions were made, maybe a psychologist to kind of explain that, because the jury, I am certain that is resonating in the jury's mind. She admitted, this crime. What about that?
All right, Olivia Rubin, Tre Lovell, thank you both. And let's listen in now to that testimony from Daniel Wolf earlier today. We are watching the Karen Reed murder retrial. Their accident reconstructionist Daniel Wolf is on the stand. Let's bring in ABC News investigative reporter Olivia Rubin and trial attorney Tre Lovell to unpack a little bit of what's happening. Tre, ultimately, this is a defense witness. They don't have to provide an alternate theory to what happened here, though they are. They're just trying to raise reasonable doubt. How do you think the prosecution did in trying to poke holes that go beyond that?
Well, I think they're doing okay. I mean, the way you attack an expert's opinion is based on the facts that they relied on and the methodology implemented. And he's trying to poke holes, saying, "Hey, the facts were wrong, the methodology was wrong, and thus your opinion is tainted and inaccurate." But I think that it's interesting when the defense is proffering this alternative theory. It's a little bit of a risk because they have the threshold of reaching beyond a reasonable doubt. But if they actually have another theory and the jury doesn't buy it, sometimes the jury will buy the reasonable doubt to that theory. And if they can't prove the theory, the jury will automatically say, well, then the prosecution must win. And so they got to be very careful. It's one thing saying, hey, they haven't proved beyond a reasonable doubt their case. We don't know what happened, but it didn't happen the way they did. When you proffer a different theory, you're kind of held accountable to make sure that's plausible. And if not, a jury could punish you for it.
All right, Olivia Rubin, Tre Lovell, thank you both. Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, the prosecution's trying to pick apart the defense's crash test expert in the Karen Reed murder retrial. Daniel Wolf testified crash dummy tests show Karen Reed's SUV did not back into John O'Keefe. The prosecution is, of course, saying that he died as a result of that. Now the prosecution's raising questions about the dummy, the math, even the sweatshirt it was wearing. Let's bring in ABC News investigative reporter Olivia Rubin and civil trial attorney Tre Lovell for more. Tre, this is critical to this case. The prosecution says Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her SUV and left him to die in the snow. The defense is saying she dropped him off at a party and she left, and whatever happened to him happened inside that party. So how critical is this back and forth now with these experts, and how do you go about trying to persuade the jury that your expert is right?
Yeah, so when you have a case like this that is really expert intensive, I mean, we're going to have over a dozen experts testifying, sophisticated people, a lot of sophisticated verbiage. How is a jury going to met all that out? And it's really going to come down to closing arguments in terms of how simple each side can present and summarize the testimony. You take away all that expert verbiage and you come down to very simple terms. And the jury's going to look at it. They're going to look at each testimony, what the expert said. And then, based on their own common sense, they're going to kind of start to draw their conclusions. And then they're going to look at the other evidence in the case. What corroborates this expert? What corroborates this expert? It's really a methodological approach that a jury takes, very systemic in terms of A, B, C, D. And the parties and the lawyers are really going to have to clear that path for the jury, because they can get confused very quickly. And if you're confused, you tend to go towards reasonable doubt.
All right, Olivia Rubin, Tre Lovell, thank you both, and stay with us.